Hey there, ready to dig into some serious history? Today's deep dive takes us back thousands of years to a period you might know as the Copper Age, but we're going to call it the Chalcolithic period or Eneolithic because those are the accurate names for it.
That
So
could be a little confusing, right?
it is.
Yeah.
So anyway, we're talking about that fascinating era where humanity began swapping their stone tools for metal ones, specifically copper.
And it really is more than just a change in what people were using, to make tools, what they were using for weapons. This shift to copper, it kind of ripples through history,
Yeah.
impacting how societies formed, how their economies worked, even how they waged war, which is something we'll get into, I'm sure.
Exactly. It's like, I knew copper tools came before bronze and iron and all that.
Yeah.
But diving into the research for this deep dive, it kind of just blew me away, to be honest with you, what this transition actually meant for humanity. We're talking like massive social and technological change.
Absolutely. And to really grasp it, I think it's really important for us to understand that we can't really put the Chalcolithic on a timeline, like put it between these two dates.
Yeah.
It's about a gradual process of like discovery and then adaptation over many centuries.
Right. Like one of the sources I was looking at mentioned it's also called the Copper Age or Eneolithic, so why all the different names. It gets a bit confusing, right?
It really does. It does. It all kind of goes back to how archaeologists initially viewed prehistory.
Mm.
They viewed it as a straight line from the Stone Age to the Bronze Age and so on, right?
Hmm.
But as they dug deeper, literally,
Mm.
they realized it was far, far more complex than that.
So instead of strict timelines, it's more about recognizing the overall shift in technology and what that meant for everyday people.
Exactly. And all those lithic terms we're throwing around, they can be kind of misleading, I guess, because um, even as copper emerged, people didn't just toss out their stone tools. They were still incredibly valuable and they were still used very widely. It was more about having more options, just finding out what the best tool for the job was and using it.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And it wasn't like, bam, all of a sudden there's copper everywhere, right? I mean, this transition took place all over the world.
You're absolutely right. The sources point to evidence of early copper use as far back as 7000 BC, and they found this evidence in places like the Fertile Crescent. Think like Timna Valley with those ancient copper mines.
That's incredible. So we're talking about copper being mined and worked with even before, like, the pyramids were built in Egypt. What really struck me, though, was that 7,500-year-old copper axe they found in Serbia.
Now, that discovery was a game changer. For a long time, people thought that copper smelting originated in the Near East, and that was it, right? But this axe suggests that it might have developed independently in other parts of the world at around the same time, which is amazing.
And this wasn't just some one-off either. I mean, we've got Ötzi the Iceman, who lived hundreds of years later and thousands of miles away in the Alps. And guess what? He's carrying a copper axe. It just goes to show how this technology spread and how people really took to it.
It does. And it didn't stop in Europe. The Chalcolithic period kind of pops up across the globe, which is really cool. South Asia, for instance, shows really interesting connections between the Indus Valley Civilization, Turkmenistan, and Iran.
Yeah, that's something that I noticed too. Like, was there some kind of bustling copper trade route going on that we just don't know about? Like, what was the deal there?
That's where things get really exciting. Well, we haven't actually dug up a copper highway. There are strong hints of knowledge being shared and materials being exchanged over really, really vast distances. Mehrgarh, which is in modern-day Pakistan, has some compelling evidence they have copper tools there, dating back to 7000 BC, right alongside those early Near Eastern finds.
So we've got copper being used in regions thousands of miles apart at almost the same time, which is just wild. It shows that even back then, human ingenuity was interconnected.
Precisely. And it wasn't just about basic tools. In Nasharo, also in modern-day Pakistan, they uncovered specialized pottery tools crafted from copper, which is really neat.
Hold on, copper pottery tools. That's a new one. What do they even use those for?
Okay, so imagine this, right? Copper blades, meticulously crafted, ranging from 12 to 18 centimeters long, all designed for shaping and refining pottery before they fire it. It speaks to an impressive grasp of not only the material, but the artistry involved too.
That's incredible. Basically, they were early artisans using copper to elevate their craft. It's amazing to see such advanced metalwork so early on. But I have to ask, what about the Americas? Were they left out of this whole copper thing? They weren't left out at all. The Americas, especially in the Andean region, they developed their own, like, unique copper working traditions. We're talking thousands of years of innovation, and they were completely separated from what was happening in the old world.
It's a really crucial point, actually. The Chalcolithic period wasn't a case of one civilization inventing something and then everybody else copied them. It was more like it was happening at the same time, all over the place, driven by human ingenuity in different corners of the world.
It really makes you think about how interconnected we all are, as humans, even going back thousands of years. But let's shift gears a bit, get out of the clouds. We've been talking about all these amazing copper tools, but what did this period actually look like for the average person just trying to live their life?
That's a great question. It's very easy to get caught up in all the technology and stuff, but the real impact was on how people lived every day. And it's true, it wasn't like everyone woke up and they had a shiny new copper plow just sitting there.
So, paint us a picture. What were some of the defining features of life in the Chalcolithic? What was it like to live back then?
Well, agriculture was still like the most important thing to these societies. It's how they survived. But it was getting a huge upgrade, larger settlements, more advanced tools, and people were coming up with new farming techniques. This is when we really start to see the very beginnings of organized agriculture, how we do it today.
So, bigger communities, more food, and they're making it more efficiently. Sounds like that probably led to some big social changes, right?
You got it. As the villages got bigger and people became more connected to each other, the social structures had to change. And resources, especially something as valuable as copper, that wasn't going to be equal.
Yeah, that makes sense. Having the best tools, even back then, could make you more successful or less successful. So the people who controlled the copper, they were the ones who had control. They were at the top. And if we're talking about weapons, they were literally at the top.
Exactly. This unequal access is most likely what caused social hierarchies to develop. And with that, you get disparities in wealth and status. It's something that we see over and over in history.
And with those better tools, did things get a little more, I don't know the right word, a little more intense between communities? Because they had copper weapons, and sure, they weren't as strong as bronze or iron would later be, but they must have been a huge change in terms of conflict, right?
Yeah, it's something that archaeologists actually debate about, but a lot of them believe that's exactly what happened. Warfare probably became both more common and more intense when they started using metal weapons.
It's kind of a scary thought, isn't it? Humans have this drive to innovate, to improve and create. It's just a part of who we are. But it seems like there's often a dark side to it, greater conflict, inequality. It makes you wonder.
It's a fascinating paradox, and it's
Hmm.
still challenging us. But to bring it back to the Chalcolithic, this period was really complex, and it set the stage for everything that came after it.
You're right. It's like this era with the copper tools and people figuring out how to live together. It was like the foundation for all the civilizations and empires that would change the world. It's crazy.
It really is mind-boggling. This simple change going from stone to copper had such a huge impact on human history, and it just keeps going.
It really does make you think. We always focus on these big events from the past, but often it's the little things, these small changes in technology and how people live together that really change the world.
Yeah, you're right. It really is pretty mind-blowing when you think about it. Makes you wonder about those little things that happen, even today, that'll have a
Yeah.
big impact later on. But we can't get too lost thinking about the future. We got to put it back to the present.
Mm-hmm.
So, what are the big takeaways from our Chalcolithic deep dive? What did we learn?
To me, I think the biggest takeaway is just how enormous this change was, going from stone to copper. And it wasn't just in one place, it was all over the world. All these different groups of people, they were totally separate from each other, and yet they all saw that copper was useful, that it was valuable, and they started using it in new ways. They were inventing things. Really makes you think.
It does. It's like no matter where we come from, we're all hardwired to explore and to experiment to see what can do, even if it's never been done before. The Chalcolithic just shows how inventive people were, even way back then. Absolutely. Just think about what they had to do. First, they had to find the copper ore, and that can't be easy. Then they had to figure out how to get the metal out of the rock, which is a whole other challenge. And then, on top of that, they had to actually make something out of it, something useful. These people were pushing the limits of what was possible. And they changed history by doing it.
No doubt about it. It's like a chain reaction. You have that first spark, that first discovery, and that leads to another and another. And pretty soon you've changed the way people live together, the way they fight wars. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and the thing is, those ripples, they're still being felt today. The fact that you and I can even have this conversation using technology that wouldn't exist without those early metalworkers, it's proof of that.
Wow. Yeah, you're right. It's like we're connected to them somehow. That's really cool. Well, I think it's safe to say that the Copper Age, or I should say, the Chalcolithic, It was about a lot more than just copper. It was a major turning point for all of us, a time when people were incredibly creative. They were figuring out new ways to live together, and yeah, they were fighting too. Can't forget about that. It reminds us that progress isn't a straight line. It's messy, things change, and every step forward comes with its own problems.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And maybe, just maybe, if we can learn from the past, from the choices those early metal workers made, maybe we can make better choices today. We have all of this new technology, just like they did, but we can use it to make the world better, not worse.
That's definitely something to think about. This has been a great deep dive. We learned a lot about these ancient metal workers, learned about the impact of their discoveries, learned that the Copper Age was way more interesting than I thought. Thanks for joining us on this trip through history, and we'll see you next time.